Welcome to another deep dive into the darkest corners of Fallout lore. Today's confession comes from the abandoned halls of Control Station Enclave, the empty launch pad at Bloomfield Space Center, and the terrible truth about America's shadow government. The Enclave didn't die. They left. And what that means for the Wasteland changes everything we thought we knew about the last 200 years. The lore begins now. I never thought I'd be the one to tell you this story, never thought I'd live long enough to piece it all together. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I found in the ruins of Bloomfield Space Center deep in the Arizona wasteland, where the sand glows green at night and the wind carries whispers of things that should have stayed buried. The oil rig was empty when I finally reached it. Control Station Enclave, they called it. That massive platform sitting 175 miles off the California coast, rusting and groaning in the Pacific waves. I'd heard the legends, same as everyone else. The shadow government, the last bastion of pre-war America, the fascist remnant that wanted to wipe us all out with their poison gas. But when my salvage crew cut through the sealed bulkhead doors in 2289, all we found was silence. Empty barracks, abandoned laboratories, and in the presidential office, a single word stamped on every document, every log entry, every piece of classified intelligence: departed. They left. The Enclave actually left Earth. Let me tell you how I know. Let me tell you what I've spent the last 3 years verifying, cross-referencing, nearly dying for, in forgotten military installations from Nevada to the capital Wasteland. Let me tell you about the Hermes 13 rocket and why the most powerful faction in the Wasteland isn't here anymore. It started in Bloomfield, or rather, that's where I started. September 2286. I was running with a scav crew called the Dust Runners, pulling tech from old Air Force bases, selling to the highest bidder. We'd heard rumors about Bloomfield Space Center, old launch facility, rockets, the kind of pre-war hardware that makes Brotherhood scribes salivate and new California Republic quartermasters empty their coffers. The place sat in southwest Arizona, remote enough that even 2 centuries after the bombs, most people didn't know it existed. When we arrived, I understood why it survived. No strategic value, no population centers nearby, just an aging space center with 2 massive launch platforms rising out of the desert like skeletal fingers pointing at the stars. The Hermes 13 rocket was still there. The Hermes 14 launch pad next to it showed obvious signs of a launch. The platform scorched black, the gantry collapsed. But 13 stood intact, a monument to a mission that never happened. Or so I thought. The operations and communications building yielded the first pieces. I found them in mission control, in terminals that hadn't been touched since November 2076. The logs were fragmented, corrupted by time and radiation, but enough remained. Enough to paint a picture that made my blood run cold. November 7th, 2076. Enclave acquisition complete. Priority Alpha personnel en route. Retrofit timeline 30 days. November 19th, 2076. Mars mission parameters scrapped. New destination, Deep Space Colony Site. Enclave continuity protocol. Omega activated. October 22nd, 2077. Final boarding complete. Hermes 13 cleared for launch. Primary personnel count 1,847 souls. Secondary personnel dispersed to rendezvous points. Launch window 36 hours. 36 hours. 36 hours before the Great War turned the world into radioactive ash. The Enclave knew. They knew exactly when the bombs would drop because, according to what I found later, they're the ones who dropped them. Vault Tech, the Enclave, the shadow government, all one massive conspiracy to reshape America. And when their plan went terminal, when the nuclear fire started falling, they didn't stick around to rule the ashes. They ran. The Hermes 13 was supposed to be a Mars mission. The United States Space Administration built it, poured billions into it, made it humanity's next giant leap. Then, funding got slashed in October 2076. Priorities shifted to vault technology, to shelters, to preparation for the inevitable nuclear exchange. The rocket sat mothballed for exactly 1 month before the Enclave seized control. I found the retrofit specifications. They stripped out the Mars landing equipment, the scientific instruments, the exploration gear. They installed cryogenic suspension pods, agricultural seed banks, manufacturing equipment, a miniature fusion reactor that could run for centuries. They turned a research vessel into a generation ship, an Ark, and in the presidential files in logs marked Eyes Only Continuity Command, I found their reasoning. Earth viability post-exchange zero. Fallout projections indicate 200-plus year recovery. Vault experiment data insufficient for Starship parameters. Alternative solution required. Recommendation: strategic withdrawal. Preserve core leadership, rebuild elsewhere. They didn't believe Earth could recover. The Enclave, with all their scientists and military planners, calculated that the nuclear war they were about to start would render the planet uninhabitable forever, so they planned an escape using the very rocket that was supposed to take America to Mars. The Vault experiments, those 122 hellish social engineering nightmares scattered across the country, those were never meant to save people. They were meant to gather data for space colonization. Data the Enclave apparently decided they didn't need to wait for. October 23rd, 2077. The day the world ended. That's when Hermes 13 launched. I found confirmation at Control Station Enclave. The oil rig logs told a different story than the one Wastelanders had been living for 2 centuries. The facility wasn't destroyed in 2242 by some tribal hero called the Chosen One. It was evacuated. Completely methodically, deliberately evacuated 62 years earlier on launch day, October 23rd, 2077, 0600 hours. Orbital rendezvous confirmed. Hermes 13 docked with Bomb 001. Personnel transfer commencing. Bomb 001. The Ballistic Orbital Missile Base, the orbital weapons platform that was supposed to rain nuclear fire on America's enemies. The Enclave converted it into a way station, a orbital transfer point. They launched from Bloomfield, docked at Bomb 001, and from there, they could go anywhere. The oil rig personnel, the ones who weren't essential enough for the first wave, they evacuated to other staging points. Raven Rock, the White Spring Bunker, Navarro. Each location had its own timeline, its own evacuation schedule. By 2080, according to manifests, I found they were all gone. Every president, every member of the Joint Chiefs, every senator on the continuity list, every Vault Tech executive who knew the real plan. The corporate leaders from West Tech, from Poseidon Energy, from General Atomics International, the prize-winning scientists, the advanced weapons developers, the genetic engineers. 1,847 people on Hermes 13, another 612 evacuated through other means over the next 3 years. The Enclave, the entire shadow government of pre-war America, abandoned Earth with roughly 2,500 people total. And they left us, all of us, to burn. But here's what keeps me awake at night, the question that's been eating at me since I found that first log entry. What happened to the Wasteland without them? If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you rewrites everything we thought we knew about the last 200 years. The Vault experiments ran completely unwatched. That's the first thing you need to understand. Vault Tech built 122 vaults and only 17 were actual shelters. The rest were social experiments, psychological torture chambers dressed up as survival pods. They were supposed to test human endurance, adaptability, breaking points, all to gather data for long-term space colonization. Someone was supposed to be monitoring them, recording the results, learning from them. That someone was the Enclave, and the Enclave left. I found the monitoring station on Control Station Enclave, Level 3 sealed section marked Vault Oversight Division. The equipment was sophisticated, powerful enough to maintain encrypted communication with every vault in America. Computer terminals lined the walls, each one designated to specific vaults or regional clusters. Vault 13, Vault 101, Vault 112. Names I recognized from stories, from legends, from the few vault dwellers who'd made it to the surface and lived to tell about it. The last entry in the system was dated October 24th, 2077, one day after the bombs, one day after the Enclave launched into orbit and never looked back. Vault Tech monitoring station offline. No Enclave response. Emergency protocols undefined. Vault experiments proceeding without oversight. God help them. God didn't help them. No one did. The vaults became isolated nightmares, their experiments running on autopilot, their residents suffering through scenarios that were supposed to be observed, supposed to be controlled, supposed to mean something. Instead, they became purposeless horror. Vault 11, where residents had to sacrifice one person annually or face extermination that was supposed to test governmental compliance under duress. Vault 77, where one man was sealed in with a crate of puppets that was supposed to study isolation psychosis. Vault 87, where they tested the forced evolutionary virus on unwilling subjects, creating the super mutants that still plague the capital Wasteland. All of it, every twisted experiment, every act of casual cruelty perpetrated by Vault Tech scientists was supposed to feed data back to the Enclave. Data they would use to build better colony ships, better long-term habitats, better ways to control populations in confined spaces for generations. Without the Enclave watching, without anyone collecting results, the experiments became meaningless suffering. The residents of Vault 12 deliberately given a faulty door to test radiation exposure. They didn't know they were dying for data no one would ever read. The people of Vault 22 exposed to experimental spore plants that turned them into walking fungal colonies. Their sacrifice taught no one anything. I met a former Vault Tech employee in the Mojave, old man older than dirt ghoul who'd worked in Vault 21 before it opened. He told me about the confusion when the bombs fell. They had procedures, protocols, check-ins with Enclave oversight every 6 months. When the first check-in never came, they waited. When the second never came, they panicked. When the third never came, they realized they were on their own. Some vault overseers kept running their experiments anyway, following procedures because procedures were all they had left. Others abandoned the programs, tried to save their residents, tried to make the vaults into actual shelters instead of laboratories. The psychological impact on vault dwellers who eventually learned the truth was devastating. I've read holotapes, personal logs, suicide notes from people who discovered they'd been guinea pigs for a space mission that already happened. Their friends died testing social stress scenarios for colonists who were already halfway to another star. Their children were exposed to radiation for research that would never be compiled. Their entire existence in those metal tombs was rendered meaningless by abandonment, but the vaults were just the beginning. The real changes, the ones that shaped the wasteland we know today, those came from who wasn't here to stop them. The Brotherhood of Steel rose unopposed. Think about that. In our timeline, in the reality we're living, the Brotherhood became the dominant technological power in the wasteland because there was no one to challenge them. Elder Maxon and his men walked out of Mariposa military base with power armor, energy weapons, and advanced training. They declared themselves the guardians of technology, the keepers of the old world's most dangerous knowledge. In a world where the Enclave stayed, the Brotherhood would have been crushed, outgunned, outnumbered, outmaneuvered by a military force that made their capabilities look primitive. The Enclave had vertebrates' aerial superiority that would have made Brotherhood bunkers into death traps. They had plasma weapons, advanced power armor, orbital surveillance potentially. They had the resources of the entire pre-war military-industrial complex. But the Enclave left, so the Brotherhood inherited the Wasteland's arsenal by default. I found evidence of this at Adams Air Force Base. The Brotherhood took it over in 2277, turned it into a major stronghold. According to the records I pulled, Adams was supposed to be an Enclave secondary facility, home to a mobile base crawler and a vertibird fleet. The defense systems were still active when the Brotherhood arrived, but there was no one manning them. just robots following 2-century-old programming. The Brotherhood waltzed in, claimed the most advanced mobile fortress in North America, and no one stopped them because the people who built it were gone. Navarro was the same story. That coastal base in California, the Enclave's major operations center on the West Coast, it was abandoned, completely abandoned. When the new California Republic finally assaulted it in 2242, they found automated defenses and a skeleton crew of maintenance robots. The new California Republic claimed a massive victory over the Enclave's military might. What they actually did was clear out an empty building. Project Purity succeeded without interference. James, the scientist from Vault 101, he completed his water purification project in the capital Wasteland. Clean water flowed to the Potomac Basin, changed thousands of lives, gave hope to a region that had been dying of thirst for 200 years. In the original Enclave timeline, they would have seized that project, contaminated it with modified FEV, turned life-giving water into a genocidal weapon. But the Enclave wasn't there to do it. So, Project Purity became what it was meant to be: salvation instead of extermination. The V curling 13 virus was never manufactured. I want you to understand how significant that is. The Enclave's grand plan, their final solution to the Wasteland's mutation problem, was an airborne virus that would kill every mutated human on Earth. Just a 0.0001% aerosol exposure could kill within an hour. Massive hemorrhaging organ failure, death so brutal that even the Enclave scientists who created it had nightmares. They planned to manufacture 250,000 gallons, release it into the jet streams, and let global air currents carry it to every corner of the planet. Wastelanders, ghouls, mutants, anyone exposed to radiation, anyone born outside their sealed facilities would die screaming. They never did it, because they weren't here. The sample they would have extracted from Mariposa, the research they would have conducted on kidnapped vault dwellers, the testing on Arroyo villagers, none of it happened. Dr. Charles Curling, the man who would have perfected that genocidal weapon, he died in the nuclear fire with everyone else. His name lives on in Enclave records as a promising chemical core researcher who was lost when the bombs fell. He never became the architect of humanity's second extinction. I found a holotape in the White Spring bunker left by someone in the Enclave's Appalachian branch. It was dated 2078, recorded by a man who sounded lost, confused, waiting for orders that would never come. It's been a year. We've tried every communication channel, every encryption protocol, every emergency frequency. Control Station Enclave is silent. Raven Rock is silent. Navarro NORAD, Cheyenne Mountain, all silent. We know the relocation plan was activated. We saw the launch window data before the bombs fell, but no one told us where they went. We're alone. We've always believed we were the government, the legitimate continuation of American authority. But what are we continuing if everyone who mattered left us behind? The Enclave personnel who stayed, the ones at remote facilities who weren't important enough for evacuation, they waited for leadership that never came. Some, like the Appalachian branch, eventually turned on each other. Others integrated into the Wasteland, hiding their identities, trying to survive in the world they'd helped destroy. A few, the true believers, kept their facilities running, kept training, kept preparing for the day the Enclave would return and restore order. That day never came. The Enclave didn't return because they never planned to. Earth was a write-off, a failed experiment, a planet they'd already eulogized before the first bomb fell. They had their genetic diversity, their seed banks, their manufacturing base. They had enough people to sustain a multi-generational colony ship, enough supplies to survive centuries in deep space, enough knowledge to rebuild civilization wherever they ended up. They didn't need Earth, so they abandoned it. The new California Republic formed without an existential rival. Think about the implications. The new California Republic, for all its flaws, its bureaucratic corruption, its imperialist expansion, it grew organically from the survivors of Vault 15 and the communities around Shady Sands. It became a functioning democratic republic because it didn't have to prove itself against another faction claiming to be the real America. The Enclave would have contested every inch of New California Republic expansion, would have declared them insurgents against the legitimate United States government, would have waged a war of annihilation against what they saw as mutant pretenders to American authority. But the Enclave wasn't there, so the New California Republic became the dominant power in California, spreading east, bringing law and order and taxation and all the messy realities of nation building. It's not perfect. God knows it's not perfect, but it's functional. It's building something instead of just trying to exterminate everyone who doesn't meet arbitrary genetic purity standards. The Institute developed without competition in the Commonwealth. Those scientific descendants of MIT hiding beneath the ruins of Boston, conducting their own twisted experiments on the surface population, they would have been rivals to Enclave technological supremacy. If the Enclave had stayed, the two factions would have either destroyed each other or formed an alliance that would have made the Wasteland even more nightmarish. Instead, the Institute became the boogeyman of the East Coast, powerful but isolated, feared but unchallenged by an equivalent technological force. I spent 2 years tracking down every Enclave facility I could find. Raven Rock empty, the White Spring dead, Chicago outposts abandoned. Every location told the same story: evacuation or extinction. The Enclave either pulled out before 2080 or died out shortly after leaving behind their robots, their automated defenses, their sealed bunkers full of pre-war technology, just waiting for someone brave or stupid enough to claim it. And you know what I found in all those facilities? Children's textbooks. Educational materials prepared by Enclave teachers for the children born on the oil rig at Raven Rock in the various bunkers where the shadow government raised its next generation. The textbooks all told the same story, the official Enclave version of history. The old America died in nuclear fire. The government, your government, chose to preserve itself for a future beyond Earth. We are not abandoning our nation. We are ensuring its survival among the stars. They taught their children that leaving was noble, that Earth was already dead, that the people left behind were mutations, genetic dead ends, acceptable losses in the grand experiment of American continuity. They raised an entire generation believing that abandonment was patriotism. I wonder if those children ever looked back. If they ever thought about the planet they left behind, spinning alone in the dark, with its billions of dead and its desperate survivors clawing through radioactive ruins. I wonder if they felt guilt, or if the propaganda worked, if they truly believed Earth wasn't worth saving. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores, because what I have to tell you next, it's even harder to accept. The philosophical weight of knowing we were left behind changed everything, changed how Wastelanders see themselves, how they build their societies, how they dream about the future, and I didn't understand the full scope of it until I talked to the people who'd learned the truth. There's a settlement in the Mojave called Vault City, founded by the descendants of Vault 8. They received the all-clear signal shortly after the bombs fell, walked out into the Wasteland, and built a functioning community based on pre-war values and technology. For decades, they believed they were special, chosen by Vault Tech and the government to rebuild America the right way. Then they found the monitoring logs, discovered that their vault was a control group, a baseline experiment, and that the Enclave had been watching them through cameras and sensors until October 24th, 2077, until the day after the bombs, when the Enclave stopped watching because the Enclave stopped caring. I met their head archivist woman named Joanne Lynette, descendant of the original overseer. She showed me the psychological reports they'd compiled after the revelation went public in their community. Depression rates tripled, suicide rates quadrupled. Their entire identity as the inheritors of American civilization crumbled when they realized the actual government, the real continuity of American power, had written them off as expendable test subjects and then abandoned Earth entirely. We thought we mattered, she told me. We thought someone was watching, someone cared if we succeeded or failed. Finding out we were just lab rats in an experiment no one was even monitoring anymore, that broke something in our collective psyche. We weren't special, we were forgotten. That sentiment echoes across the wasteland. Every community that learned the truth went through the same crisis. The Brotherhood chapters that discovered enclave facilities full of advanced technology, but empty of personnel, they had to reconcile their mission of preserving technology with the knowledge that the people who created that technology chose not to stay and use it. The new California Republic leadership that found classified documents about the enclave's evacuation plan, they realized they weren't fighting for America's soul against a rival government. They were building something entirely new in the absence of any legitimate authority. Because that's the question that haunts wasteland politics to this day. Who represents America's legal continuity? The Enclave claimed they were the pre-war government in exile, but they exiled themselves from Earth entirely. They abdicated their responsibility to the nation they swore to protect. So, what does that make them? What does that make us? The answer, the one that's slowly becoming accepted across the wasteland, is simple. Nobody represents the old America. That nation died when its leaders chose the stars over its citizens. What we're building now, the new California Republic, the Brotherhood, the various city-states and trade networks and struggling communities, we're not restoring America. We're creating something new, something that hopefully learns from the old nation's failures, including its ultimate failure, the choice to abandon its people when they needed leadership most. I've studied the cultural shift extensively. Before widespread knowledge of the Enclave's departure, wasteland factions oriented themselves around pre-war American identity. The Enclave obviously, but also the new California Republic with its two-headed bear and its constitution modeled on old California. The Brotherhood with its ranks and structure borrowed from the military. Even raiders and tribals defined themselves in opposition to or ignorance of pre-war civilization. After the truth spread, things changed. The new California Republic stopped calling itself the restoration of America and started calling itself the successor to America, a new nation built on the bones of the old. The Brotherhood's identity crisis deepened as they realized they were preserving technology for a society that would never return because that society chose to leave. New factions emerged with no pretense of connection to the old world groups, like the followers of the apocalypse who explicitly rejected pre-war authority and focused on building something better. The cultural evolution is still ongoing. I've seen it in the art, in the music, in the stories people tell around campfires. Less nostalgia for the world that was, more hope for the world that could be. Less rebuilding America, more building something worth living in. The Enclave's abandonment paradoxically freed the wasteland to imagine futures that aren't just pale imitations of the past, but it came at a psychological cost that's still being paid. I've interviewed dozens of people across the wasteland, asked them how they felt learning that the government left Earth. The responses range from bitter to resigned to oddly liberated, but there's a common thread: betrayal, a deep, abiding sense that the people who were supposed to protect them, who had the resources and knowledge to help rebuild, chose not to, chose to save themselves and damn everyone else. A ghoul in Underworld, former resident of Washington, D.C., who survived the initial blast, he put it best. I watched the sky on October 23, 2077. I was standing on the National Mall when the bombs started falling. And through the mushroom, clouds through the fire and the death, I swear I saw something rising. Bright streak heading up through the destruction, moving too fast to be a missile, too controlled to be debris. I thought I was hallucinating, that my brain was breaking from the radiation, already eating me alive. But I saw it. I saw them leave, and I've spent 2 centuries wondering if they ever looked back, if they ever felt shame for what they left behind. Do you think the Enclave on their colony ship, wherever they ended up, do you think they remember Earth? Do you think they tell their children about the planet they abandoned, about the billions they left to die? Or Have they rewritten history, made themselves heroes instead of cowards, survivors instead of deserters? I found a fragment of a speech in the Raven Rock terminal, something President Richardson's ancestor recorded before the launch. It was marked private log, never meant for public consumption. History will judge us. Perhaps history already has. We tell ourselves this is survival, that preserving the best of humanity is worth sacrificing the rest. We tell ourselves that Earth is doomed, that these people are already dead, that our duty is to the future, not the present. But late at night, in the quiet moments before evacuation, I wonder if we're just cowards. If we're abandoning our responsibility because it's easier to start fresh than to save what we broke. God forgive us. The Wasteland won't. He knew. On some level, the Enclave leadership knew what they were doing was abandonment, not salvation. They did it anyway because the alternative was staying and facing the consequences of their actions. They started the Great War, or at least contributed to it through their conspiracies with Vault Tech. They turned America into a paranoid war machine primed for nuclear exchange. And when the fire they helped light consumed the world, they fled rather than fight it. The technological implications of their absence are staggering. Every Enclave facility I've explored contains equipment decades beyond anything else in the Wasteland. Fusion reactors, advanced medical technology, manufacturing systems that could have rebuilt civilization in years instead of centuries. All of it sitting unused, gathering dust, waiting for people with the knowledge to activate it. The Brotherhood has been trying. I'll give them credit for that. They've reverse-engineered some Enclave technology, gotten vertibirds flying again, improved their power armor using abandoned Enclave designs. But they're working from incomplete blueprints, trial and error, dangerous experimentation. The Enclave could have simply given them the knowledge, could have accelerated Wasteland recovery by generations. Instead, we're rediscovering pre-war science through blood and mistakes. The Institute in the Commonwealth took a different approach. They found Enclave research on synthetic organisms projects that were abandoned when the evacuation happened. The Institute took those fragments and ran with them, creating synths, artificial humans with consciousness and agency. Whether that's progress or another flavor of horror depends on who you ask, but it represents Wasteland innovation beyond pre-war parameters. We're not just recovering the old world's technology anymore. We're creating new things the Enclave never imagined, because we're solving problems they never stayed to face. I've traced the Enclave's evacuation routes across North America, from Bloomfield to the Orbital station, from the oil rig to coastal launch points, from Raven Rock to classified rendezvous coordinates I found in encrypted files. Every route tells the same story of methodical planned abandonment. They knew months in advance. October 2076, when Bloomfield funding was cut and the Hermes 13 retrofit began, that's when the final evacuation timeline was set. 11 months of preparation, 11 months of selecting who was valuable enough to save and who could be left behind. The selection criteria were brutal and revealing. I found the lists. Priority Alpha, the absolutely essential personnel. Presidents, Joint Chiefs, top scientists, corporate executives, people whose knowledge or authority made them irreplaceable. Priority Beta, valuable specialists, engineers, doctors, skilled technicians, people who could maintain their colony ship and whatever settlement they built. Priority Gamma, genetic diversity candidates, young, healthy, fertile, chosen to expand the gene pool and prevent inbreeding over generations. Everyone else was expendable. The soldiers at Navarro, who weren't on the lists, the scientists at Raven Rock, doing important but not critical work, the Vault Tech employees who'd helped design the experiments but weren't needed to interpret results. Thousands of Enclave-affiliated personnel were simply left behind to face the nuclear fire with everyone else. I found a suicide note in the White Spring bunker left by an Enclave researcher named David Chen. It was dated November 2077, 1 month after the bombs. I dedicated my life to the Enclave, 20 years developing water purification systems, environmental recycling, the life support technology they needed for their space mission. They used my work, took my designs, and left me here to die. I wasn't priority. Alpha wasn't even priority beta. I was a tool they used and discarded. My wife was priority gamma genetic diversity candidate. They took her and told me I didn't make the cut. I watched her board the vertibird to the coastal rendezvous point. She looked back once, and I saw in her eyes she knew they were making her choose between me and survival. She chose survival. I don't blame her. I blame them. I blame the Enclave for making that choice necessary. I blame myself for serving them so loyally and never questioning what I was building. The note ended there. His skeleton was in the room, slumped over the desk, a pistol on the floor. How many David Chens were there? How many loyal servants of the Enclave discovered too late that their service wasn't enough to earn them a seat on the Ark? The Vault Dwellers had it worst, I think. They were explicitly created as data sources for space colonization research. Every Vault experiment was designed to test scenarios the Enclave might face on a generation ship or colony world. Vault 13's isolation testing the psychological effects of long-term confinement. Vault 27's overcrowding seeing how population density affected social cohesion. Vault 77's extreme isolation pushing the boundaries of human sanity. The residents thought they were survivors chosen few, preserving humanity. They were lab animals producing data for a mission that launched without them. Vault 8 received the all-clear signal from Control Station Enclave on November 1st, 2077. 9 days after the bombs, 9 days after the Enclave evacuated. The signal was automated, triggered by the launch sequence, a final courtesy, or perhaps a final cruelty. It told Vault 8 the surface was safe time to rebuild. Good luck. It didn't mention that the people who were supposed to help them rebuild were already in orbit preparing for interstellar departure. I've walked through Vault 8 through Vault City they built. It's a success story by Wasteland standards. Clean water, electricity, education, law, and order. They did everything right, and they did it without any help from the government that put them in that vault. They succeeded despite being abandoned, not because of any support or guidance. That's the Wasteland story in microcosm. Survival through spite, success through stubbornness, civilization rebuilt by people the Enclave deemed unworthy of saving. The ghoul population represents another layer of abandonment. Radiation turned them into immortal pariahs, discriminated against, feared, but also uniquely suited to certain aspects of wasteland life. The Enclave classified them as mutants targets for extermination in their FEVA Curling 13 plan. But the Enclave left before manufacturing that genocidal virus. So, ghouls survived, built communities, became integral parts of wasteland society, despite the prejudice they face. I interviewed a ghoul named Carol in Underworld who remembered working for Vault Tech before the war. She was a low-level technician, vault maintenance, and life support systems. She survived the bombs because she was in a hardened facility when they fell, got irradiated but didn't die. I knew about some of the experiments she told me, her ruined face unreadable. Not all of them. I wasn't cleared for the really twisted stuff, but I knew the vaults weren't all shelters. I knew we were preparing something beyond just waiting out the war. I thought it was noble, gathering data to save humanity. Then I found out humanity meant the Enclave, and the Enclave meant the people rich and connected enough to get on the evacuation list. Everyone else was just experimental fodder. I've lived for 200 years with that knowledge. 200 years knowing I helped build cages for people the government planned to abandon. Some nights I wish the radiation had killed me. Most nights I'm glad it didn't. Spite's a powerful motivator. I've outlived every Enclave bastard who stayed on Earth, and that brings me more joy than it probably should. The Enclave left Earth on October 23rd, 2077. By my calculations based on the supplies they took, the personnel manifests, the cryogenic suspension capabilities, they had enough resources for a voyage lasting anywhere from 50 to 200 years depending on their destination and technology. If they targeted a nearby star system, Proxima Centauri or Alpha Centauri, they might have arrived already, might be building their perfect society on some distant world right now, or they might still be traveling. Generation ship protocols mean children born in space, raised in space, dying in space, also their great-grandchildren can see a new sun. The Enclave bloodlines that fled Earth might have spent 2 centuries in metal corridors looking at stars through portholes dreaming of planets they'll never touch. Or they might be dead. Space is hostile, unforgiving. Equipment fails. Radiation shielding degrades. Social structures collapse in confinement. The Enclave might have escaped Earth only to die in the void between stars, their perfect genes and advanced technology meaning nothing in the face of cosmic indifference. I don't know which scenario I prefer. Part of me wants them to have succeeded, to have found some garden world where they built their utopia. At least then, their abandonment of Earth accomplished something. Part of me wants them to have failed catastrophically, to have died knowing they threw away their humanity for nothing. Revenge fantasies. I know, but after 3 years studying their evacuation, reading their justifications, seeing the devastation they left behind, I think I'm entitled to some anger. The ultimate question I keep returning to, the one that's defined my entire investigation, is whether the Wasteland was better off abandoned. And I hate that the answer isn't simple. Without the Enclave, we avoided genocide. F.E. Vla Curling 13 was never manufactured, never released into the jet streams, never deployed to kill every mutated human on the planet. That alone represents billions of lives saved, assuming the Wasteland population even reached billions after the Great War. The Enclave's vision for Earth was extinction, followed by recolonization by the genetically pure. Their absence meant we got to define our own future instead. The Brotherhood of Steel became the Wasteland's technological guardians instead of being crushed by superior Enclave forces. The new California Republic grew into a functioning republic without fighting a war of legitimacy against the self-proclaimed real government. The Institute developed its synthetic technology without Enclave interference or competition. Communities from the hub to Rivet City built themselves without having to navigate Enclave demands for submission to federal authority. We built our own Wasteland. Messy, violent, chaotic, but ours. Not a restoration of the old America, but something genuinely new, shaped by survivors instead of inheritors, defined by adaptation instead of ideology. But the cost, God, the cost, 200 years of unnecessary suffering. The Enclave had the technology, the knowledge, the resources to accelerate recovery. Advanced water purification that could have prevented thousands of deaths from radiation poisoning. Medical technology that could have treated the mutations, the cancers, the slow genetic degradation that plagued early survivors. Manufacturing systems that could have produced food, shelter, medicine, the basics of civilization, instead of forcing people to scavenge through radioactive ruins for decades. They chose not to share it, chose not to help, chose to take their advanced science and leave Earth to die in the dark. I found agricultural data at Raven Rock that broke something in me. Crop yields, soil treatment processes, radiation, resistant seed varieties, everything needed to turn the Wasteland back into farmland within a generation. The Enclave had this information before the bombs fell. They could have distributed it, could have left it for survivors, could have programmed their computers to broadcast it on emergency channels. Instead, they locked it away in sealed bunkers and left. How many people starved because the Enclave took the knowledge of efficient farming with them? How many communities failed because they couldn't grow enough food, couldn't purify enough water, couldn't treat basic diseases that pre-war medicine eliminated? The suffering wasn't necessary. It was a choice, the Enclave's choice to save themselves and abandon everyone else, to rediscover civilization through trial and blood and error. I've documented the human cost extensively. Mortality rates in early Wasteland settlements ran above 60%. Disease, radiation sickness, starvation, violence, all combining to kill more than half of every generation. That slowly improved as communities learned to survive, as they rediscovered agriculture and medicine and basic sanitation. But It took decades, sometimes centuries. The Enclave could have reduced that timeline to years with simple information sharing. They didn't because dead wastelanders weren't their problem anymore. The technological dark age could have been avoided entirely. The Brotherhood hoards technology because they believe wastelanders can't be trusted with it, that pre-war science in the wrong hands led to the Great War. There's some truth to that, but the real reason for technological regression was loss of knowledge. The Enclave possessed comprehensive libraries, complete technical documentation, educational systems to train new scientists and engineers. They took all of it when they left. We're rediscovering physics, chemistry, medicine, engineering, everything the old world knew through dangerous experimentation. People die in nuclear reactor accidents because we don't have the Enclave's training manuals. Communities suffer plagues because we don't have their medical databases. We're rebuilding human knowledge from fragments and guesswork, while the complete archive floats between stars on a ship we'll never see again. I met a scientist in the followers of the Apocalypse woman named Emily Ortal, who specializes in recovering pre-war medical knowledge. She showed me her research into radiation treatment, decades of work, trying to piece together procedures the Enclave could have simply told her. I've lost colleagues to this, she said, showing me notes stained with what I realized was blood. Doctors who tried experimental treatments based on incomplete data. Patients who died because we didn't know the correct dosage, the proper procedure, the variables we weren't accounting for. Every death is a data point. Every failure teaches us something, but it's so slow. We're buying knowledge with lives when we could have just inherited it. That's what makes me angriest about the Enclave. Not that they left, but that they took everything with them and left us to suffer in ignorance. The social cost might be even higher. Wasteland society is brutal, violent Darwinian. The strong prey on the weak. Raiders terrorize settlements. Slavers profit from human misery. Factions war over resources while innocents starve. Some of that is inevitable in post-apocalyptic conditions, but the Enclave's absence made it worse. They were the government. Corrupt, fascist, genocidal, yes, but still an organized authority with resources to impose order. Without them, the wasteland fractured into hundreds of competing powers, none strong enough to unite the others, all convinced their way was the only path to survival. The new California Republic's expanding democracy, the Brotherhood's technological feudalism, the Legion's totalitarian slavery, the Institute's detached scientific tyranny, all these systems emerged to fill the void the Enclave created when they left. Maybe that diversity of approaches is healthy. Maybe competing visions for wasteland society produce better solutions than Enclave-imposed order ever would. Or maybe we're just rationalizing chaos because order was never offered. I found children's graves at a settlement called Canterbury Commons. Small markers, dozens of them representing kids who died from preventable diseases, malnutrition accidents that proper infrastructure would have avoided. The settlement's elder, a ghoul named Tulip, told me every community has graveyards like this. Every settlement buries children who could have been saved if the wasteland had the medicine, the food production, the basic safety that the Enclave possessed and chose not to provide. We don't mourn the Enclave's absence, Tulip said, standing among the graves. We mourn what they could have prevented and didn't. Every child here is a choice they made. Leave Earth, take the technology, let the survivors figure it out or die trying. We figured it out. But the cost was generations of suffering that didn't need to happen. The psychological trauma of abandonment runs deeper than individual communities. It's become part of wasteland identity, this knowledge that when humanity needed leadership most, its leaders chose cowardice. It breeds cynicism, distrust of authority, rejection of grand ideologies. Why believe in nations or governments when the last real government literally abandoned the planet? Why trust promises of a better future when the people best equipped to build that future decided it wasn't worth their time? This cynicism has positive and negative effects. Positively, wastelanders don't fall for authoritarian promises as easily. The Enclave's fascist ideology would find less purchase in a population that knows the original Enclave ran away. Negatively, it makes cooperation harder. Communities that could unite to rebuild faster instead remain isolated because collective action reminds them of collective abandonment. I've studied the long-term genetic consequences too. The Enclave left with carefully selected genetic diversity optimized to prevent inbreeding over generations. Earth's remaining population had no such optimization. Radiation exposure caused mutations, some beneficial, most harmful. The human genome on Earth is diverging from baseline pre-war genetics, creating what some scientists call Homo sapiens radianus, a radiation-adapted subspecies. We're evolving, becoming something the Enclave wouldn't recognize as human anymore. And maybe that's fitting. They decided we weren't worth saving. We're becoming something that doesn't need saving, something adapted to the wasteland instead of the world that was. The Enclave would classify us as mutants. By their standards, almost everyone born after 2077 carries enough radiation-induced mutations to fail genetic purity tests. That's the irony. They left to preserve pure humanity, and in doing so condemned Earth's humanity to become something else entirely. If they ever returned, they'd find a planet populated by the very mutants they feared, the very deviants they wanted to exterminate. And those mutants built a civilization without them. I wear a tattered American flag on my armor. 50 stars, 13 stripes, the symbol of the nation that abandoned Earth. People ask why. Why carry the symbol of betrayal? Why honor the government that ran? I tell them it's a reminder. This flag represented ideals, democracy, freedom, the promise that government serves the people. The Enclave violated all of it. They weren't the real America. They were traitors to everything America claimed to stand for. The real Americans are the survivors who stayed, who rebuilt, who refused to give up on Earth even when their leaders did. We're the inheritors of America's better angels. The Enclave took its worst impulses, its fascism, its genetic purity obsession, its willingness to commit genocide for ideological reasons, and they left. What remained was the possibility of building something better. The new California Republic, for all its flaws, is trying. The followers of the apocalypse are trying. Even the Brotherhood, in its way, is trying to preserve humanity's knowledge for future generations. We're trying. The Enclave stopped trying and ran. I found a holotape at the Bloomfield Space Center, the last recording made before Hermes 13 launched. It was marked Personal Log President Thomas Eckhart, dated October 22, 2077. His voice was calm, measured, absolutely certain. Tomorrow we launch. Tomorrow we leave Earth to its fate and secure humanity's future among the stars. History will remember us as visionaries or cowards, depending on who survives to write it. I believe we're visionaries. I believe preserving the best of humanity is worth sacrificing the rest, but I acknowledge the possibility I'm wrong. If anyone finds this recording centuries from now, if Earth somehow survived and rebuilt, know that we made the choice we believed was right. We chose survival over sacrifice. We chose the future over the present. Whether that makes us heroes or villains, I leave to your judgment. We won't be here to defend ourselves. We'll be too far away to care what Earth thinks of us anymore. That's what cuts deepest. They don't care. Whatever the Enclave is now, wherever they ended up, Earth is ancient history to them, a planet they used to call home before they decided it wasn't worth the effort to save. We're footnotes in their history, abandoned ancestors, the primitives they left behind to scavenge through radioactive ruins. But we survived. We built this wasteland into something livable. We took the ashes they left us and grew crops in the contaminated soil. We took the ruins they abandoned and made them into homes. We took the future they said wasn't worth their time, and we created it anyway, without their help, without their technology, without their precious genetic purity. We survived out of spite. Some nights, I look up at the stars and wonder if they made it. If there's an enclave colony out there, orbiting some distant sun full of people who've never known radiation or hunger or the desperate struggle to survive in a broken world, I wonder if they think about Earth, if they regret leaving, if they ever plan to return and see what we built without them. Other nights, I hope they all died in the dark between stars. I hope their ship malfunctioned, their life support failed, their perfect society collapsed into chaos and cannibalism. I hope they realized too late that running was the wrong choice, that Earth was worth saving, that the people they abandoned were stronger and more deserving of survival than the cowards who fled. I don't know which scenario is true. I'll probably never, no. The Enclave left no way to contact them, no means of following them, no promise to return. They're gone absolutely and completely, and Earth is on its own. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe we needed to be abandoned to discover what we're truly capable of. Maybe the Wasteland's strength comes from knowing no one's coming to save us, so we have to save ourselves. I've spent 3 years investigating the Enclave's departure, traveling across the Wasteland, excavating their facilities, interviewing survivors, piecing together the story of humanity's greatest abandonment. This is my testimony, my confession, my warning to anyone who still believes the government has our best interests at heart. The Enclave left Earth for the stars and never looked back. They took the best technology, the brightest minds, the most resources, and they left the rest of us to burn in nuclear fire. We survived anyway. We built anyway. We created a future anyway, and we did it without them. That's the legacy of October 23rd, 2077. Not the bombs, not the war, but the choice the Enclave made to abandon Earth rather than save it. That choice defined everything that came after. Every struggle, every triumph, every community that clawed its way out of the radioactive ash did so knowing the people best equipped to help had chosen not to. We were deemed unworthy of saving, so we saved ourselves. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. The Enclave is gone. Earth remains, and we, the abandoned children of the Wasteland, we're still here, still fighting, still building, still surviving despite every reason not to. They wrote us off. We proved them wrong. That's the story of the Wasteland the Enclave left behind. That's the truth I found in those empty facilities, those abandoned bunkers, those hollow promises of government protection. The Enclave ran. We stayed, and in the end, that made all the difference. I'm done searching for them. Let them have their stars. We have Earth, broken, radioactive, dangerous, beautiful Earth, and we're going to make it ours.